Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Caitlin.
Hi, audience. It's the first show of the year, and we are focusing on our student, the way we talk about ourselves and our students. But before we jump into that, we'd like to introduce ourselves. I'm Caitlin Cook, and I am a K-5 math instructional coach here at ESC Region 11. You can find me on Twitter at math_educaitlin.
Educaitlin, that's cute. Well, my name is Michelle Green. I am also a K-5 elementary math specialist here at the Service Center, and we are very excited to record this very first podcast. Not only is it a podcast, it's a video podcast. This is our first time to do this. We're really excited about that.
All right. So there was a quote that I came upon, and I thought this was interesting, and it kind of spurred this whole idea behind this podcast, or this episode of the podcast. And the quote is from the Strength-Based Teaching and Learning in Mathematics, 5 Teaching Turnarounds for Grades K through 6 by Beth, Kobett, and Karp. And the excerpt says, in many ways, teachers and students have been conditioned to continuously and frequently unpack their deficits. And that really kind of sat with me and made me reflect on my time in the classroom, what I see now with educators in the classroom, and just how students might think of themselves. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, I'm actually still thinking about that. It's this idea of deficits and what that might look like, and where do they come from? Like, how do students, if I'm thinking about our pre-K students in kindergarten and first, what is it that's happening that's creating these deficits so early on in their educational careers? But you said you were thinking about it from when you were in the classroom. So what are your thoughts on it?
Well, I just know that what kind of what I unpacked from this was that we are frequently asked to look at our shortcomings, right? Looking at our practices and asking, what could we do better? What are we going to do better next time? What is this student missing? And coming from a place of kind of a place of a lacking place, right? Like such a negative connotation to it. And so I've really lately been challenging myself to be reflective in a more positive way and thinking about what things did go well, right? Like when you deliver a lesson in class, if you reflect back on that lesson, what was something really positive that came out of it? And just how can we get more of that in our next lesson? How can we build from that place of positivity instead of going into that, oh, next time I really should have done this, or I should have asked this question, or I should have let more time for this, and kind of always criticizing ourselves instead of looking at it from a positive standpoint.
Well, yeah, I think when you talk about deficit, there's a book, The Power of Moments, that they address this. They talk about how we can have 100 pieces of feedback and 99 of them will be positive, and the things that we do is we focus on the one thing that wasn't as positive, so maybe the one negative. And so it makes me really kind of process my own practices, and when things, whatever it's a session or coaching or in the classroom, what are the things that I walk away from? Am I walking away thinking of what are the things that went really well? Or do I get kind of caught up on the things that I feel like didn't go quite as well as I thought they would?
I think the litmus test for this for myself is when I'm like, hey, what went well versus, hey, what do I need to improve on? I can think of a million things that I need to improve on. And sometimes it's hard to even pinpoint 1 or 2 things that I feel like I did well. And I think our students can feel the same way, and our teachers can feel the same way.
So how can we help students and help teachers not feel that way? So how can we get them to shift from thinking in that deficit mindset to thinking in more of an asset mindset?
Yeah, I think that's the $1 million question, right? If we could just automatically make everyone be so positive, it might make a big overall change, but clearly there's some friction here when making this mindset shift, right? And I'm looking at some data from some studies from preschool all the way to college classrooms show teachers' beliefs directly influence teaching practices and ultimately student performance. A recent study by Kelm in 2014 found teachers' attitudes about students with disabilities to learn and achieve higher level thinking was a significant predictor of student performance on national assessments. So it's powerful in that we have to first think about ourselves as educators and what are those thoughts that are coming through our minds and how is that directly affecting the instruction in my classroom, how my students feel about themselves, how we talk about ourselves and our students matters.
Well, and we know that the research tells us that our math identities, that it's shown to be that it's shown to open and close doors for our students, and our students as well as who grow up to be adults sometimes see themselves as not good in math, and so when they hear the word math, they kind of cringe. And when I see adults do that, I always wonder, man, what happened in your educational years that made you really just think like that about math? And then I think about our students and making sure that how I see myself as a mathematician, that I'm not actually unintentionally putting that on my students, because maybe there's some things that I'm not as good at, but I don't want that to transfer to them. So how can I also overcome some of those things as well? Because I don't want how I believe about myself to turn into maybe what I believe about students unintentionally, like subconsciously.
Yeah.
It kind of makes me think about when we talk about how we describe ourselves and also our students. When we think about ourselves in the realm of math, how do we describe our own selves? And then what does that look like? Do we use language that is uplifting and positive, or do we use language that makes us seem like we're just not good at it?
Yeah.
So
I think part of that, one step that we can take initially is to change the narrative that plays in our head and that we verbalize and that we internalize from other people. If we're conscious about those thoughts that we're having and what we're listening to and how we're speaking, like changing from talking about students in a way of saying low students and high students, right? We're putting that out there, and it's probably unintentional, but we can be directly impacting the instruction we're giving just by labeling those students that way.
Well, and it makes me wonder when we say low, and I'm going to use air quotes on this one, what does that mean? And when we say high or high flyers, what does that mean? Does that mean that I'm always going to be categorized that way? So I attended this conference recently where Mike Flynn talked about about changing the narrative about how we describe our students. And one of the things that he really challenged us to think about is, how do we celebrate all of our students? How do we, and who are we celebrating? And what it turns out that we are actually celebrating the students that we are categorizing as fast and the most accurate and are participating. And
those are our smart students.
And it really pushed me to think, why do we celebrate those? And so then he went on to talk about concrete, representational, and abstract thinkers, and how we want our students so quickly to get over to be abstract thinkers because that's who we attribute the smart or the high flyers to. And so by doing that, we resort to tricks and memorization of procedures and things like that. But what he really wanted to do is challenge us to say, hey, how can we celebrate our students right where they are right now? For my students that are in this concept and they're needing to use concrete materials to help develop an understanding of the concept, how can we celebrate right where they are at that moment? And then as a math educator, how can we build a bridge to get them to go deeper in their understanding, to be more of a representational thinker? And how can we get them to go back and forth between these two to really solidify where they are in that concept? And in that moment, at that day, whether a concrete thinker, an abstract thinker, a representational thinker, it's not a linear process. It's sometimes different concepts require you to move back and forth between the two of them. And to think, how can we celebrate every student exactly where they are? Because he talks about how they are thinkers. And in the word thinkers, there's the word think. And that there is a lot of thinking going on. And we need to celebrate that. We need to celebrate what that is and how students are showing in that moment that they are math capable, or I like to call them that they are being mathematicians.
Yeah. So kind of to build off what you said, or basically my question here is, when we're talking about our students and going back to that high, low mentality, and it's like, if you kind of think of them as, are they showing me an understanding of concrete thinking? Are they showing me representational thinking? Are they already, with this concept, working abstractly? And it kind of, when you remove that label, it really helps you to be more flexible with that student, because is this student always low? And is this student always high? But if we remove those labels and start thinking about them as learners and where they are in the progression of learning with the concept that we're currently on, that really is a big shift. And I think that's where we can be intentional with the way we're describing students, with the way that we are listening and allowing other people to describe our students. And again, how we describe ourselves, being a little bit more flexible with ourselves and thinking, okay, I'm not here, I don't understand this, to I'm not quite there yet. What can I do to bridge this or build those bridges back and forth and move ourselves in our philosophy of teaching and help our students move where they are in the content at the time.
I 100% agree with that. When we feel recognized, even as adults, it changes how we see things or how we feel about ourselves. And that recognition for ourselves as well as our students, it begins to shape our identity of who we are as mathematicians or as math capable. I feel like we all want that positive recognition. And as a student, I want to be able to demonstrate my learning to you in a way that you celebrate me. And every time that I'm celebrated, I'm going to want to keep doing that, and I want to keep bringing that. And then my math classroom now shifts, right? And so not only am I changing how I'm describing my students or how I'm describing myself, but now they're also changing how they're describing themselves and how they're describing each other. And that's powerful.
And think how powerful that is, where you have a student that is in that concrete stage of learning, and you are able to recognize that and say, wow, you're really showing me a strength here by building this, building with your manipulatives to show me your understanding. I appreciate you using this strategy, and you're adding value to the class, you know?
Yeah, and we know that, there's not one strength that makes a good mathematician.
Right.
Like, we all have different strengths, and we all work together. And so when I can begin to identify that and see how my strength adds value to maybe what my group is working on today, or maybe where I'm at in this concept or this project or whatnot, then things shift in the classroom for you.
And even if you can say you're having another student who's functioning more on an abstract level and they can't really describe the way they did something, they can make a connection to that concrete learner's representation, and then those students are building concepts together, right?
They're building that bridge. They're strengthening the bridge. They went from just a lighter bridge to a more solid bridge. So just to kind of recap what you were thinking, or what we were talking about, we're talking about how we talk about our students and the language that we use and why that language is so important. So a shift that we're kind of proposing here, where we really would love to hear, is instead of labeling students as high, low, medium, struggling, maybe not even labeling them at all, but taking the labels out altogether and using what they're showing you in that moment to describe what they're doing in the mathematics and how they're showing that they're math capable. Is that kind of what you would say is a nice summary of what we're talking about here today?
Yeah, and just to add to that as educators ourselves, that we need to be nicer to ourselves, right? Quit looking at ourselves so critically in that deficit-based space and start looking for those strengths. So I do have an R11 challenge. And the challenge is to share one teaching strength that you have and ask one colleague to share one strength of theirs. So since we're challenging you to do this, I would like to also challenge ourselves to participate in this. So Michelle, my strength today was I intentionally listened more than I spoke so that I could get further grasp of what my colleagues were trying to share.
That's a really great strength. Yes, that's a really
Thank
great
you.
strength. So one strength so far today that I feel like I have shown is also the ability, that's not what I mean. A strength would be to take what I feel like people are saying and then be able to put it to like a design, to like take someone's idea and make it visible, to help make thinking visible today.
Wow.
So I would say
Making thinking visible.
Yeah.
That's such a mathematical strength that you're showing.
Yeah, and maybe, what did I say just a second ago? Maybe that is a skill. Mm-hmm. No, I don't know.
I think it's a skill.
It's a skill.
Well, next week, or in 2 weeks, on the next episode of the podcast, we're going to kind of talk a little bit about how to find those student strengths and dive a little deeper into that. So thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you for joining us.